Jessica L. Morris. Fascinating discussion with Jessica. Really, really enjoyed it. I open with what's the difference between being spiritual and being religious. Jessica was raised in a troubled childhood. Her father, a minister, also an alcoholic, admitted to her that she was a mistake. They didn't plan on her. And many things kind of tailed from there. She ended up going into a lot of addiction herself, went into recovery. But I asked about her. She's an author. She wrote an excellent book. And, what's your relationship? Her relationship with Jesus is very, very interesting. And she felt that he actually came to her at one point in her despair, and she didn't want to face him and kind of ran away. And she ended up going to seminary school. It's absolutely fascinating. The things that she's done and where she is now, it's fascinating. I don't know anyone like her, and she's got a light, and what she talks about with her relationship, like I said, to her creator, and the book, the process of writing the book, and how it helps, and it's just a fascinating discussion with Jessica. I can't wait. She's on writing her third book now, but I really, really enjoyed my conversation with Jessica. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Excited to talk to you, Jessica Morris. Thank you so much for your time. What is the difference between someone being spiritual and someone being religious?
That is a loaded question, my friend. Well, for me, early on in my recovery journey, I remember someone saying to me, I said religion didn't work for me. So these steps in the program that have to do with God, I'm just going to skip over them because, I had a really shady past with God in my life. And so the person said to me, they said, well, this isn't about religion. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, it's about spirituality. And I said, well, what's the difference? Like you just said. And she goes, well, religion is for people who are afraid to go to hell. Spirituality is for people who've already been there.
In this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection, powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow.
And to this day, and I have to say that I don't quite agree with that 100% anymore, but back then, it was exactly what I needed to hear, so that I would just go, jump into the deep end and do whatever they told me to do. And I did. And you did. Because I'd been to hell.
Yeah. And which do you now currently relate to better, spirituality or religion?
They're part of the same thing for me now.
Mm.
Because really, religion really gets a bad rap, I think,
Yes.
especially in Western civilization. And so, religion is made up of a bunch of people, a bunch of
Mm.
human beings,
Mm.
and for the most part. And we go into it thinking that, it's going to be always a spiritual experience. And we're forgetting that there's human experience involved there. And, having been raised by a minister who was also a violent alcoholic, I understand that the guy standing at the front of the church, just a guy,
Mm. Mm.
not someone that I need to put on a pedestal. In fact, if I do put him on a pedestal or her on a pedestal, I'm doing them a disservice.
Mm.
Of course, they're, held to a higher standard than most people, but they also are going to make mistakes. They're going to disappoint us. And if we put our faith in that person or even in our church, right? We're going to get in trouble. That's I have to look at myself. If I'm putting my faith in a person, where's God?
Hmm.
So that for me, my spiritual journey is where's God in all of this, and God must come first for me in everything, my husband, my family, my work, my writing, my everything, my spiritual direction. God must be first on the highway,
Mm.
which is, probably, I think that's going to be like my last place of redemption, because still, I'll be on the highway, someone cuts me off, and it's like I haven't meditated in 3 months. That's what it feels like, because it just,
Mm.
roars up in me. That's the place where I'm allowed to be righteously indignant. But yeah, other than that, I would say, we tend to give religion a hard time when it's a man-made structure, and if we would look at it that way, we wouldn't have as many problems with it.
Hmm. Jessica, can you describe your relationship with Jesus Christ?
It You know what? I think the best way to describe it would be, I had a conversation with my husband one time. We were out to dinner for our anniversary, and um, my husband was not raised with any kind of religion or anything like that. We met in recovery, so he did have a higher power,
Mm.
and so I knew that he at least believed there was something greater than him, and that was really all that was important to me at that point. Um, and we were talking about our wedding day, and I said the only thing I would change is I would have carried daisies,
Hmm.
and I had carried yellow roses. And he said, "Why?" He's like, "Roses are so much prettier, and they, yellow's your favorite color." And I said to him, "Because daisies make me think of Jesus."
Hmm.
And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "Jessica, everything makes you think of Jesus." And that really is my relationship with him. It's just gotten stronger and more mature and childlike at the same time over the years. It is transformed from what it was. When I was a child, my relationship with Jesus was about suffering.
Hmm.
I never thought God loved me. I thought God pretty much thought I was a big mistake, and that's why he put me in the family he did, so that I could be punished. And at the same time, I loved Jesus because it's perverse in a way, but I love Jesus because his dad abused him also.
Mm.
That's how I looked at it. Growing up, why would any parent make their child be born and then kill them to prove a point? I mean, that's how I grew up
Hmm.
thinking. And it's a really warped way of thinking. And at the same time, it always kept me connected.
Mm.
And I knew Jesus understood me, even in my darkest moments.
In your kind of recovery, kind of in your depths, I heard you talk about you felt that Jesus kind of approached you, but you didn't want to face him. You weren't kind of worthy. Describe what happened there, please.
I was about a year out of college, and I was an English major when I was in college. I wanted to write the great American novel,
Hmm.
and I also had no idea how that would work, and didn't really listen to anybody who was trying to help me to do that when I was in college. So after college, I was working temp jobs. I was working in a factory. I'll give you a reference that you'll probably remember. Waiting for Richard Gere to come sweep me off my
Ah,
feet and carry
yes,
me out of the
yes,
factory. You know, that's the kind of
absolutely.
imagination
Mm,
fantasy world I lived in at that point. And I was that person who was going back to my old college to party. And I was at a party off campus, and it was January, it was freezing cold. And I went outside to smoke a cigarette, and it was so cold, no one was out, it was just me. And the sky was absolutely clear. I went to college in a really small town, not a lot of street lights. You could see every star in the sky, and I couldn't see the beauty. All I could do was yell. I remember standing there just telling God off.
hmm,
And, like, how dare you put me through this my whole life? And now I'm working in a freaking factory. My friends are getting married. I mean, of course, it wasn't my fault at
hmm,
all.
hmm,
And I had this experience where, and this was weird because at this point in my life, there was zero prayer, there was zero interaction with God. I was not going to church, was really just angry, just very angry. And I had this experience where I felt a warmth and a peace that I'd never felt before.
hmm,
And I knew in every ounce of my soul that if I turned to my left and looked, Jesus would be standing there, physically standing there, not an apparition, just Jesus standing
hmm.
there. And I immediately became terrified and ran my butt back into that party as fast as I could. I mean, I did not turn and look. I ran away from him.
Hmm.
And it, I really kind of pushed that memory away for a very long time. Never told anybody that it happened, just kind of let it go because I realized, or I thought I realized I had made my choice.
Hmm.
Right. I went back in the party, and it was a good 6 years, 5 or 6 years till I got into recovery after that. And it was a good 15 years after that that I actually really remembered it.
Hmm.
And that's when I was sitting, I was 15 years in recovery, 15 plus years in recovery, and um, sitting in a class in seminary on New Testament and thinking to myself, everything we've learned this semester in this class talks about how metaphorical Jesus was when he was talking to people, how symbolic he was. And we had just gone over the book of Revelation, and that's a scary book.
Yes.
and and our professor was not at all scary about it. He was very academic in the way that he approached it with us
Hmm.
and talked about the symbolism in it, and that some people may even say that it was a symbolic piece of writing about how Rome's oppression of the Jews was going to someday be lifted. I
Hmm.
mean, it really it blew my mind because I never heard that in church. What I heard
Hmm.
in church was you're going to burn in hell for
Right.
being a sinner. And I'm sitting there and I
Hmm.
just thought to myself, what if when Jesus was talking about his second coming, he didn't mean for the whole world at once? He meant for me
Hmm.
or for you individually. Like he was going to come back just for me. And when that thought came in my head, I remembered the moment when he showed up, and it blew my hair back.
Hmm.
And I remember going to the library after that class, and the tulips, it was towards the end of the semester, so springtime. The tulips that were lining the walk to the library were, I felt like they were singing.
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't hear anything, but it just the way they were opened up to the sky and they were so purpley pink. It was so beautiful. And I thought to myself, this is a thing.
Hmm.
This could be a thing, and at the same time, I didn't want to tell anybody because I'd never heard anybody else say this. And I thought, am I nuts? Am I crazy? And I literally kept it inside for about 2 years before I mentioned it to a professor. And because I was like, I went looking for it in the library and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anybody saying this.
Wow.
And I just went to this professor who was talking about thesis writing, and I said, what do you think of this idea? And he said to me, it sounds like you're talking about eschatology. And I looked at him and said, what the heck is eschatology? And he said, it's the study of the end times. And there are a lot of different recognized and accepted ideas about it, but that's not one of them that I've ever heard of. So you might want to do a study on that. And that's how my book came to be. It's how my thesis idea came. It's how I learned all these things that help me to see that there's nothing to be afraid of in my relationship with Jesus.
Hmm.
Because for a long time I thought that if I really embraced this, it's not pretty. It's not easy to
Hmm.
follow Jesus, and when um there's a lot of trauma and baggage, there's a part of you, or at least for me, there was a part of me deep down inside of myself that knew something's going to have to change drastically within me for
Hmm.
this to work.
I heard you talk about, Jessica, like when you were young, your parents said that you were a mistake, and your father was a minister, but he wasn't the best example. He struggled with some addictions, etc. And so all this kind of culminated to that point. I think you said you were like over 130 pounds overweight, and it kind of came to this point on this rooftop. But that journey there to get there, did you always feel that you're sinning, you're going to go to hell, there's nothing I could do to turn around? I mean, how did the despair drive you?
Well, actually, it's funny you use the word despair because I tell people all the time that my first higher power in recovery is an acronym for God, the gift of desperation.
Hmm.
I was so desperate at that point that I was willing to do what anybody told me to do. I mean,
Hmm.
literally, there was a woman in the program who always used to say, if they told me to push a peanut with my nose down the street naked in order to get sober, I'd do it.
Mm.
And that was my first higher power. Like, look, I am so desperate. I will do whatever you tell me to do. And that didn't mean that I didn't complain about it. Of
Right.
course I complained about it. I didn't want to go to all these meetings. I didn't want to have a food plan and weigh and measure my food and stop drinking alcohol. And, I didn't want to look at myself. I didn't want to say, wait, this might be partially my fault, because I had spent my entire life. I was 29 years old when I got in recovery. I spent those 29 years blaming everything on my dad, my mom, the world, and so there was a significant change just in the fact that I was willing to kneel down to the desperation. Like,
Hmm.
okay, I am tired of feeling like crap every day of my life. And it was about a year before, maybe less than a year, but 6 months to a year before I actually followed the advice of a counselor I was seeing and went into a recovery program for my food addiction. I went to the grocery store after work, and I went in to get my binge food for the night because I had had a horrible day, or maybe because I'm just a food addict and that's how
Mm.
you end your day, And I was wandering around the aisles, and I was standing. I'll never forget this as long as I live. I'm standing there looking at the selection of cookies, and I knew I had this realization that nothing in this store was gonna make me feel better.
Hmm.
Like literally, I knew that. And it hit me like a ton of bricks because the next thing that I knew was that I could not leave the store without something. And I didn't know it at the moment, but that's when my disease of food addiction turned on me.
Mm.
It literally did not work one time after that.
Hmm.
And I kept doing it because I didn't know anything else. I couldn't stop myself. There was nowhere else to go. Um, but I'll never forget. It was a market right around the corner from where I worked,
Hmm.
and as long as I live, that moment is just embedded in my brain. That if I left that store without something, I probably would have killed myself.
Mm.
I heard, Craig Ferguson, great comedian, talking about his alcoholism once. And he said, it's important to note that for a long time, my alcoholism saved my life.
Mm.
And same for me, for a long time, my addictions saved my life. They kept me from killing myself. That's
Hmm.
not a plug for
Right.
continuing your
Not
addiction.
advocating, but yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
important to know that because it tells me again and again that God uses everything.
Hmm. You went to seminary,
Yeah.
Jessica. I mean, it's incredible. The one of the quotes that you have is that when you graduated, you were overwhelmed with gratitude, not pride. Can you talk about what it's like to go to seminary and what you felt like when you graduated? Why did you go? What were you trying to achieve?
Honestly, I wanted to learn what my dad didn't tell me. I
Ah.
wanted to learn what the church didn't tell me. I wanted to learn it
Mm.
for myself. And I was about 15 years sober when I enrolled. And so I had experienced significant excavation of the trauma of my childhood. I had gone through a lot of therapy with a certified addictions counselor who might as well have been Jesus with skin on him. I
Mm.
mean, he never once mentioned Jesus in all the time that I worked with him, but this guy he was just amazing. He was like a channel for me for God. And I was able to really dig into that trauma and call it what it was, take responsibility for my life. And once that stuff was out of the way, I couldn't get enough of God. Like
Mm.
I was just like, I remember going on Amazon and just putting in spirituality, Jesus, and I would buy every book that I saw, and I'm getting chills telling you this. It's like,
Mm.
that's when I feel like the Holy Spirit started really moving in me. In addition to that, the chaplain where I worked was the first man of the cloth that I was ever able to trust.
Hmm.
And I did a lot of work with him on God hating me. And so by the time I got to seminary, I was just sort of this open, vulnerable, bring it on, I
Mm.
want to know everything, and it was wild because I was doing it part-time because I, had to work. And while I was there, I tripped over spiritual direction. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Mm.
Ended up going an extra year so I could get a certificate in that. And recognizing that, no one person has the answer. No one denomination has the answer. No one religion has the answer. The
Mm.
answer is for each one of us. It's our own relationship with God, with our creator, because other than an atheist, I'm pretty sure everybody would say they were created by something outside of themselves,
Mm.
and so I had nothing to do with being created, you know and that counselor who I talked about with the trauma helped to reframe the mistake idea for me. You know, my dad told me I was a mistake. My mom didn't say the word mistake, but she confirmed what he said. She
Mm,
just said he shouldn't have told you that. You
mm,
know, she didn't go there, he's wrong. You know, she just said, "Oh, he shouldn't have told you that." And so, you know, if they think I'm a mistake, God must
mm,
think I'm a
mm,
mistake. And so when my counselor was the first person I ever told that, because I didn't want other people to know. Uh, I thought if other people know, then I'm really screwed, right?
mm,
Because then they'll take advantage of me. And I told this counselor because I knew enough to know at that point that I had to tell him everything. I had to be honest about everything that was tripping me up. And when I told him, he was so beautiful about it. And he listened and he said, I'd really like an opportunity to reframe this for you.
mm,
And I said, bring it, bring it. I'd love it to be reframed because I don't like living with it like this. And he said, your dad was clear with you. He didn't want you. Your mom was pretty clear with you in regards to what he said. She also shared with me later in life a time when she was pregnant with me that he was abusing her and she started bleeding and she did not go to the hospital because she was afraid the church people would find out.
mm,
And it just kind of cemented it for me, like, wow, the church people are more important than my life, you know. And so I told all this to the counselor and he says to me, this all may be true, right? It is true. They're human. Somebody else divine really wants you here
mm,
because this world tried really hard to get rid of you.
mm,
And you're still here. And there's something for you to do
mm,
that's divine. He said, I don't know what it is, but I would love to watch you find out.
mm,
And I, Joey, that just boom, 180, like, there's something for me to do. You
mm,
know, I mean, it was just this amazing, wonderful thing. And when I took that idea to the chaplain, um, he just got this big smile on his face, and he was such a great encourager, encouraging me to go to seminary. Even though, of course, my husband, of course, I wasn't going to have a new job that was going to make me lots of money. I was just going to learn. And my husband's like, "Are you kidding me?
mm,
You want to have all this debt to just go learn this stuff? What, you know?" And I watched God do work in my husband as well, who now has said to me, "Quit your job." I mean, 4 years after seminary, but he's saying, "Quit your job and do this writing thing and see if it works. Just
mm.
do it. Put your whole life into it." You know, and that's the guy who was saying, "Are you crazy? What are you doing?" You know, and it's just shown me that when you trust, for me anyway, when I trust God, anything is possible.
Mm.
Anything.
Hey, Joey Pinz here. Want to take your podcast experience to the next level? I'm excited to invite you to become a YouTube member. It's the absolute best way to support the channel and enhance your connection. Join our amazing community and unlock the incredible perks, custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority comment replies. Your voice will always stand out. Be the first to watch new videos with early access, receive special membership shoutouts, and get exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and updates. Dive into content available only to our members, special videos, deep dives, and insider perspectives. Engage directly with me. Suggest podcast topics you want to hear, and even get personalized video shoutouts. Hit the join button right now and become part of something special. Let's build this amazing community together. I can't wait to welcome you as a new member. Join the Joey Pinz family today. So, Jessica, brings us to your book. You took 2 years to write it. You actually convinced your employer to just work, 4 10-hour days so you could have Friday off to do it. So, what do you want the reader to come away with from your book?
I would love to give people some peace about the end times. I grew up in a lot of terror of that. And, that might have been why I ran away, part of why I ran away from Jesus that night, because
Mm.
I knew when he came back, or at least what the church told me, when he came back, that was time for me to go to hell, And so um, I don't want people to look at it that way. And if you really read the things he said, if you really get a relationship with him, and I think you can see that through the book. It number one, it takes time and discipline.
Mm.
It takes a commitment to the relationship. It takes learning it and a lot of sacrifice, but not but, and it's all worth it.
Mm.
The peace that I have in my heart today, eh, I this is what
Mm.
happens. I can't even talk about it because it's miraculous. I know who I was. I know who I was, and who I am today is not even it's not even close. There's a great
Mm.
do you watch The Chosen?
I have seen it, yes.
The line that Mary Magdalene, I actually have it on a sweatshirt, that she says to Nicodemus when he's asking her, what do you mean he relieved you of these demons? And she says, all I can tell you is that I was one way and now I am completely different.
Hmm.
And the thing that happened in between was him. It sounds ridiculous
Mm.
to someone who has not experienced it, but it's real. It's real. And so I hope that when someone picks up the book, they can sit with it for a while too. It's not one that I want people to just rush through and say, "Oh, yeah, I read that. Did you read that book?" Like a lot of these reading apps are like, "Did you read 20 books this year?" And it's like,
Mm.
"No, just take your time, maybe a chapter a day, take a day in between, think about it, meditate on it, talk to people if you have questions." I think one of the things that over and over again, I even recognized while I was writing it, is that this this dying to myself, which is the end of times for me, and being reborn, it's not like I thought it was when I was a kid and I heard about people being born again and everything was great. No, it's a nonstop process, sort of a cycle
Hmm.
of I'm going to die to this now, and I believe you know I'm only need to die to the thing I'm ready to die to, because God knows when that is. He'll reveal it.
Hmm.
He'll show me. I mean, just recently, just recently, I had this awakening during meditation, and I was just almost banging my head against the wall. How did I not see this before? And so
Hmm.
it because I wasn't ready to see it before. And God knew that if he showed it to me before, I would have missed it. Or maybe he did show it to me before and I missed it. Either way, it doesn't matter. I know now, though, that I can point to it and say, yeah, I don't want to be like that anymore, because it's not serving any purpose.
What's your writing process, Jessica? Did you have an outline? Did you storyboard?
With this book, I definitely had an outline. Let me be clear in saying that it came from my thesis and I wanted an A. My main goal with my thesis was to write about this topic and get an A.
Hmm.
I was very much
Academic.
married to that while I
Hmm.
was writing the thesis, which is where the majority of the research came from. And so what I would say about that is, for me, getting a grade for something helps me significantly
Hmm.
to kind of light a fire under my butt to do it right. And so there were times when I was in the library and tired and I just want to go home, but I know there's one more thing I need to check on this,
Hmm.
and so I would go do it. When I was transforming it into the book or expanding on it so that I could get the whole story. Um, it was more of a meditative process. I knew some of the chapters I wanted, but like I said, it was when I was writing that I actually awakened to certain things. One of the chapters in here is called The Death of Perfect Knowledge, Jessica.
Hmm.
And I think it's the chapter before that is entitled The Death of Perfect Recovery, Jessica, because I knew she needed to die. The girl who needed to be the best in recovery, the girl who needed to have more years than anybody else, that girl, she needed to just get buried 6 feet under because
Hmm.
she was not helping. She was not helping. She was demanding. She was um, not fun to be around, you know? Uh, but I didn't know that perfect knowledge Jessica had to go to.
Hmm.
And, a lot of times, Joey, it comes to me in my mind first, and then it travels down to my heart.
Hmm.
And I remember graduating from seminary and saying to people, and I meant this, okay, because I knew it in my head that all I know now is how much I'll never know. Because something I learned while I was in seminary is there's just not enough time. There's not enough time to read
Hmm.
everything I want to read or to learn everything. There's always going to be somebody smarter in the room, and who's going to know something I don't, right? And that's okay. In my head, I knew that, and the words came out of my mouth. It traveled to my heart when I was writing this book, and that's why the chapter appeared, The Death of Perfect Knowledge, Jessica, because I recognize that anytime that I think I know, it's a red flag.
Hmm.
you know, I know you should listen to me because I know.
Hmm.
Flag. There's nothing wrong with being confident in God and what God will provide. But if I'm going at it with what I know, that's just me. I find that to be disturbing because it reminds me that I'm starting with and it's not about what I know. My confidence today, in fact, I don't say self-confidence anymore. My confidence is God confidence. I'm
Hmm.
confident that God is guiding me. Sometimes my husband will look at me, even though he's now, he's watching The Chosen with me and he's doing some Bible study at church. And so he's learning these things for the first time. And sometimes he'll look at me and he's like, I just don't understand
Hmm.
how you know that God is going to do this. I'm like, I just know. I just know he will. That's my
Just know
answer.
it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the phrase. I heard you mention the phrase "dying to self." What do you mean by that?
Well, that's the subtitle of my book is One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology.
Hmm.
And so that's what I sort of coined the phrase. Whereas, in theological circles, they talk about apocalyptic eschatology is a accepted form of it, and that's like the book of Revelation. It's apocalyptic really comes from the word reveal, right? And so it's something that's maybe being prophesized about or something people are talking about in the future. This is going to be revealed. There's also realized eschatology, which is from most people talk about that in the Gospel of John, because a lot of times Jesus will say in the Gospel of John specifically, the time is now. This is happening now. And that's what they mean by realized. It's the end of things is happening now.
Hmm.
And that's why I just put the word personal in front of it because it's the end of me. And like I said, it's a continuous cycle of dying to me, which in itself is a relearning. I'm consistently relearning and having to throw away old ideas. There's a great prayer in recovery for people who've been around a long time, and things start to get a little rote. And it's called the set aside prayer. And it's God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know
Mm.
for an open mind and a new experience. And because the chaplain, my spiritual mentor, used to say, um, you can't learn anything if you think you know everything.
Hmm. I find as I get older, Jessica, I have more questions than I have answers. So when somebody says, they've tried faith and therapy and recovery and just none of it works, what do you say?
I would say, have you tried spiritual direction?
Hmm.
Because I'd love to sit with you and talk about that. I know my spiritual director that I had when I took that first class. One of the things she said to me, because I still at that point, I didn't have this back then,
Hmm.
and that was only probably about 7 years ago now. And one of the things she said to me in the first session, she asked me to tell her my walk with God. And so I did. And she said to me, wow, you got detachment down pat. She said, you didn't blink an eye.
Hmm.
It's like you were telling somebody else's story. There's some really traumatic stuff you're talking about. And part of that is, in recovery, you do tell your story a lot, and so I think there's a part of you that shuts down a little bit. I shouldn't keep saying you. For me,
Hmm.
it was shutting down a little bit, maybe as a protection. But what she was pointing out to me was that I was separating myself from God every time I did that, and I never would have seen that on my own,
Hmm.
and anything that I try on my own probably is not going to work.
Hmm.
When someone says I've tried faith or I've tried religion, I usually ask them a lot of questions about what did that look like? Who else was involved? Did you ask for help? Things like that, because I've found that when I try to go something by myself, it it's not going to work because
Hmm.
we weren't meant for that.
Hmm.
As much as, I'm an introvert. And when we're done here today, I'm going to need a good hour of quiet,
Wow.
you know, like to sort of rejuvenate and allow spirit to just do its movement so that I can pick up some writing, do some more writing. And, when I'm with a bunch of people, I have to walk away to get my energy. That doesn't mean I don't ever want to be with a bunch of people
Right.
because people help me. I have a meeting this afternoon with my current spiritual mentor. She's coming here, and we're doing some work together, and I can't wait for that. And I
Hmm.
also know I needed to set it so there'd be a time in between this and that, just because that's what I know about myself.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, the true introvert needs time alone to gather themselves. They find energy in aloneness, whereas the extrovert is the opposite. They find
yeah,
energy in groups. Has there been anything, Jessica, in the last month or so that you've changed your mind on?
yeah. Hmm. Let me think about that. Uh I don't want to say that I changed my mind on this because it felt like an opening happened.
Hmm.
Um, I've been talking with. I hate talking about politics. I hate it. I can't stand it. I think it's ridiculous the way we yell at each other. It's just ridiculous.
Divisive, yeah.
Um, and I have a friend from seminary who believes sort of the side of what I believe. And I haven't met a lot of people who are willing to talk about it when they come from the opposite sides. And he and I were talking about something else. He does a podcast, and we were talking about his podcast. And uh, I asked him a couple questions, and then he asked me a couple questions, and it became this dialogue back and forth. And we laid down some ground rules, like, let's keep Jesus in the center of this. Let's um, not judge. Let's not point fingers. Let's just
Mm,
share our thoughts and opinions. And I recognized that I can trust God in those conversations when and if they're necessary.
mm,
Before I thought I had to just walk away and go, you know what, this isn't safe for me to talk about. This isn't, I don't want to talk about this. This only ever ends in arguing. Who am I to say that?
mm,
And how do people ever change and learn, or at least respect each other, if they don't talk about it? You know? So it's kind of a general idea, but it's basically me becoming more trusting of God's guidance in my life and in the life of the other person.
mm,
I have no control over what anybody says to me, what they think of me, what, and really it doesn't matter. What matters is what God thinks of me, right?
mm.
And who's in control of this conversation we're having right now? It's not Joey, it's not Jessica, it's God. I really believe that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to sit here confidently. I'd be afraid you were going to come at me with something, and you might. And then I can just let God do what God does and allow me to, live in the light, however, whatever that looks like. I don't know if that's that. I hope that wasn't like a word salad, what I just did, but it it makes
Yeah, well
sense.
it's amazing you kind of adopt to let Jesus take the wheel kind of thing. But, when you have like a, civil discourse about politics, that's so refreshing because we don't see that anymore. People
No.
tend to dig in, and I reserve the right to change my mind on any given subject, given new evidence.
Yes.
I can't, I don't, I have more questions than answers. So when you talk to somebody like that, who's at the opposite end of the political spectrum of you, and you can, like you said, let's put Jesus in the middle. Let's be civil about it. Let's ask each other questions. And you know what? That's a very interesting point. We don't see that today. So when it happens, we're kind of awed and shocked, but it should happen more.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be very nice. The
And I
problem is,
remember it happening when I was younger.
yeah, there was more to the
Yeah.
problem is it doesn't sell. People
Yeah.
want short clips and,
Yeah.
divisiveness and, when you get people angry, they watch more and they vote and so that's the idea. And then of course it all kind of comes around to money, I feel. But yeah, it's refreshing when that happens. So I think my story, just because I started my business in the 90s, and I was working way too hard and putting my, you mentioned you're 130 pounds overweight. I was putting my health in the back seat, just working 16-hour days. Next thing I know, I'm in front of the doctor, and she says to me, I'm at 340 pounds and, I'm at 200 now. And she says, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. So this was my come to Jesus moment. This is when, I said, look, I can abuse myself all I want and I could, convince myself that I'm working for a bigger picture. But if I don't help myself get healthier, I'm not going to be around for my children, my family, etc. So it scared me. So I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost those 130 pounds and kept it off. You can't look at it as a destination, right? Many people, I went through the finish line and I'm back and I can go back to my old habits. These are lifelong
Right.
traits.
Right.
So when I say this, people say, what's the secret? What you do? And there's no secret. Discipline. You mentioned it before, focus, motivation, general areas under discipline is what I use and continue to use. I'm certainly not disciplined in everything. I fall short. I'm deeply flawed, Jessica. But I like to think that discipline does help. How does discipline play a role in your life, Jessica Morris?
It is everything. It is, and a lot of times I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning
Yeah.
because I want to spend a lot of time with God before the sun
Mm,
even comes up.
mm.
That did not happen overnight. I didn't just one day go, oh, that's it. I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It happened because it needed to, and because I had discipline enough to do it at the time. And, early in recovery, my first sponsor told me I had to call her every morning at 7:10. And I was like, I don't get up that early. And she said, well, then get someone else to help you, you know? And so it was like, oh crap, I guess I have to get up that early. And so that's how it started. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I would get up at 7:05 so I could go to the bathroom, and then I would call her,
Mm.
and it's turned into, then she suggested I start praying in the morning. And even if it was just a minute, or even if I just said, please God, or thank you, or whatever, and that turned into me wanting to do some more morning readings. And because I was feeling better, you see.
Mm.
And I started to feel better. And it was like, how can I get more of that? Right. So all right, I can get up a half hour earlier. And then it turned into an hour.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to school and working full time. So now I have to get up even earlier so I can still get that hour.
Mm.
Now I've graduated from school and I'm only working full time, and I'm still getting up that hour earlier because, wow, this is awesome. Look at all this time I have. Um, Discipline, disciple comes from the same root
Sure.
word in the Latin form, and it's about learning. Disciple is learner, discipline is learning.
Hmm.
And I'm never going to learn anything. I'm
Mm.
never going to get closer to God if I'm not willing to commit to it. And I, I'm like, okay, fine. That's what I'll do because it feels good. I feel better. It's funny, and I'll just, you probably have women in your life who have experienced menopause, and I'm right around that. It's all
Mhm.
happening right now,
Mhm.
and I have literally not changed my food plan. Minor changes in the last 25 years, just
Wow.
minor changes. But in the last 5 years, it has not changed at all in
Wow.
regards to the amounts of food I take in on a daily basis and the types of food, right? I have gained 15 pounds in 2 years' time. First of all, that's not fair. Okay, let me just say that not fair at all. However, there was a wonderful woman in my early recovery who said, if your cups and scales are on target in the kitchen, the scale in the bathroom will always work itself out.
Hmm.
You need to have that trust, right? But what my doctor added to that, because I was telling her about this and how frustrated I was. She's been my doctor for 27 years, so she's seen me through it all. And she said, Jessica, you're going to have to add to your walking, because I walk as my meditative exercise. She's like, you're going to have to add some strength training. I'm not kidding you. I added that discipline back to my regimen, like 2 or 3 times a week. I do some strength training, and it's easy stuff. It's stuff I learned when I was playing sports as a kid,
Mm.
push ups, sit ups, squats, all that kind of stuff that you can do without weights. My pants fit better today.
Wow.
My weight has not changed. I'm still at that up 15 pounds where I'm not happy. I don't like what that number is,
Mm. Mm.
but my pants fit better. I feel better in my body. I can move better. Discipline is a beautiful thing. When you're willing to do it, the rewards are it's
Yeah.
like overwhelmingly wonderful. You get way more back is what I'm saying.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, you certainly do, and a lifelong learner. I can't imagine a time where I'm not learning. It's, the vision of this podcast. I mean, I just, yeah, like I said, more questions than answers. What motivates you, Jessica?
Wow. That's so big. I mean, the easy answer is God.
Mm.
That's the easy answer. It's the big answer. It's the real answer. But I think more than that, it's helping other people to find their peace.
Hmm.
I know what it's like to live in darkness and despair and anger, and it's so ugly, and
Hmm.
it's exhausting. It's exhausting to live like that. I mean, I remember saying to somebody, "No wonder I was tired all the time."
Hmm.
I was carrying around like 4 garbage bags of crap from my childhood, And so if I can help someone else find their way to at least opening their mind just a little bit,
Hmm.
or taking that first step, you know, uh, I was telling someone the other day that there's this woman who came into one of my recovery programs about 3 years ago. And she was hard, man, when she came in. She was hard. And I mean, like just angry and hard and and now when she shares in the meetings, her face lights up.
Hmm.
She's I just look and she's like, I'm getting a chill when I'm telling you this. It's like a validation. Like it's almost like her face is like the tulips, her face is opening like a
Hmm.
flower and there's light there now. There's a relaxed nature where there wasn't one. And that is, I think, more for me anyway, more beautiful for me to see happening in another person than in myself, because it's like, wow, look, it works.
Hmm.
I mean, it's so beautiful to see. And so, yeah, that's what keeps me going every day, watching my husband transform. It's not something I ever thought I would see. And it's absolutely beautiful, and that's what I believe we're here for.
Hmm. Impact.
Yeah. Yes. You know what? I don't have kids.
Hmm.
I don't have. I made a decision pretty long time ago. If I have a kid, I'm going to ruin it.
Hmm.
And even after I got into recovery, I thought the only way I stop this cycle is to not have a kid.
Hmm.
I don't regret that. I absolutely believe that was a decision from God. And I also know it's because I have so much time to give to my recovery community now. I have so much time to give to my church community,
Hmm.
my friends, my family who's still around. That's my purpose here, is to give myself to all those communities that have helped save my life.
So, given that motivation, Jessica, how do you measure success?
One person tells me, "Hey, your book really helped me."
Hmm.
You know, there's a woman who was in recovery here when I showed up. She had about 5 years at that time, and she's still around. She's in her 80s, and she called me recently, and she said to me, she said, "Jessica, I just finished reading your book, and I have to tell you something." And now this is a woman who when I first came in the program, I looked up to her.
Hmm.
She had 5 years. Are you crazy? Right? That's awesome. And she said to me, "I had no idea I was a Pharisee."
Hmm. A Pharisee is?
A Pharisee is a Jewish leader from the time when, Jesus was hanging around, and they were so self-righteous and, religion, the law, they were the ones who pretty much offered Jesus up,
Hmm.
because it was going to interfere with their power. I mean, there's way more to it, but
Sure.
um they were, if you watch The Chosen, they were Shmuel. They
Hmm.
were. I have a great Chosen fan club that I belong to, and people will often, if somebody says something derogatory, on the fan club, people will go, "Don't be a Shmuel," you know. But the fact that this woman had all this time,
Hmm.
she had all, and I know she's a churchgoer on the outside, outside of recovery. She also goes to church and believes, and she's a believer. And she read my book, and that's when she noticed it.
Hmm.
That kind of blew me away, that for whatever reason, the way that I explained it, it sunk in,
Hmm.
and that's success to me. That one person, whether in recovery, not in recovery, never heard of Jesus, whatever, they say to me, I do a blog and I get one like. That's success.
Hmm.
One person read that today and said, you know what? That's worthy of a like. I
Hmm.
like that. And maybe it's just planting a seed, but that's all I got to do, provide the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and God takes care of the results.
Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypinz.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it. That's wonderful. I love, many people, Jessica, would, make this huge transformation and kind of keep it to themselves and, live their life. But you chose to share it with others and to write about it and, hopefully encourage others to see it. I mean, to me, that's a trait of a remarkable person. And I thank you for it. And I thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely wonderful. So anybody watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you?
My website's got everything. It's jessicalmorris.com. You can contact me via the website. My books are there, spiritual direction, everything. It's all there.
Jessica L. Morris, Morris. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes.
Yes.
Jessica, thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in your area, perhaps we'll get a cup of tea.
Oh, I would love it. It'd be great. You're always welcome.
Thank you so much. You be well.
You too. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.